Approximately 4.5 billion years ago, our planet Earth was born. Let us see the journey it took for Earth to reach from its birth to the point where you are watching this video. The birth of the planet. Earth grew from a cloud of dust and rocks surrounding the young sun. Earth formed when some of these rocks collided. Eventually, they were massive enough to attract other rocks with the force of gravity and vacuumed up all the nearby junk, becoming Earth. The Moon probably formed approximately 100 million years later when a planet-sized chunk of rock smashed into the Earth and threw up a huge cloud of debris. This condensed into the Moon in outer space. The birth of life on this planet. Nobody knows exactly when life began. The oldest confirmed fossils of single-celled microorganisms are 3.5 billion years old. Life may have begun a bit earlier than that, but probably not while huge rocks were still raining down on Earth. Life may have begun in warm alkaline vents on the seabed, or in open water, or on land. We don't know, and we don't know what the first organisms were like. Harnessing sunlight for life. All life needs energy to survive, and the biggest source of energy for life on Earth is the sun. Some of the early microorganisms evolved a way to use the energy from sunlight to make sugars out of simpler molecules. This process is called photosynthesis. But unlike green plants today, the first photosynthesizing organisms did not release oxygen as a waste product. So, there was no oxygen in the air. The plate tectonics. Today, Earth's surface is divided into a few dozen plates of rock, one of which sometimes plows under another to be destroyed in the planet's molten heart. This process, called plate tectonics, is thought to have begun around 3 billion years ago. Only when plate tectonics had came into operation could the first continent nicknamed UR came into being. The oxidation event. For the first half of Earth's history, there was hardly any oxygen in the air. But then some bacteria began harnessing sunlight to make sugar from carbon dioxide and water, just like green plants today. These microbes pumped out oxygen as a waste product, creating the oxygen-rich atmosphere we have today. But the first oxygen may have caused the entire planet to freeze over into a snowball Earth by stripping the greenhouse gas methane from the air. Endosymbiosis. The first organisms were simple cells like modern bacteria, but some of them became much more internally complex. These eukaryotes developed a lot of specialized equipment within their cells. They also had a new source of energy, sausage-shaped objects called mitochondria that were once free-living bacteria, but which were absorbed in a process called endosymbiosis. Every animal and plant you have ever seen is a eukaryote evoluted 2 billion years ago. The first sex. Between 1.8 billion and 800 million years ago, the fossil record looks fairly dull, so much so that the period is called the boring billion because there is literally a billion years of single-celled organisms being formed and nothing much more than that. Just before 1.2 billion years, plenty was happening. For one thing, sex may have evolved for the first time. It's not clearly why or when. Some organisms stopped simply dividing in two and started the messy business of sex. But it was definitely going on 1.2 billion years ago. There are fossils of red algae from that time that were clearly forming specialized sex cells such as spores. Multicellular life. For the first time, life was not just made up of single cells. Now, cells were teaming up to form larger organisms with things like mouths, limbs, and sense organs. It's hard to say when this happened. There are fossils of large organisms dating back 2.1 billion years, but these may simply have been colonies of bacteria. Different groups of organisms probably evolved multicellularity independently, with plants managing it before animals. So, scientists have declared that on an average, it is only in between 1.2 billion years to 800 million years ago that multicellular life may have been formed. Snowball Earth. Earth froze over again, twice in the space of 200 million years. The ice may well have stretched all the way from the poles to the equator. This second snowball period may have triggered the evolution of the first complex animals. The first complex organisms, weird tube and frond-shaped things called the ediacarans, appeared soon after. The Cambrian explosion. Soon after animals evolved, evolution went through two major growth spurts. In the Cambrian explosion, it seems almost every group of modern animals appeared within tens of millions of years. This apparent explosion may be partly down to better fossilization, as many animals now had hard shells. Then, 489 million years ago, each animal group expanded in the Great Ordovician biodiversification event. Plants colonized the land. Some animals ventured onto land as far back as 500 million years ago, but they only visited briefly, perhaps to lay eggs in a place without predators. Plants were the first to take up permanent residence on land. The first land plants were relatives of green algae, but they rapidly diversified. The first mass extinction. The Ordovician period was a time when life flourished, but towards its end, the world cooled dramatically and ice sheets spread from the poles. The ensuing ice age is called the Andean Saharan because the evidence of it comes from the Andes Mountains and the Sahara Desert. The deep freeze led to the second worst mass extinction on record, the Ordovician Silurian. Most life was still confined to the sea, and 85% of the marine species were wiped out. In the aftermath, fish became much more common, from fins to legs. With plants well established on land, the next step was for animals to move out of the water. Insects were among the first around 400 million years ago, but they were followed soon after by big backboned animals such as Tectonics, a fish that looked a bit like a salamander. Fish like Tectonics would eventually evolve four limbs and give rise to amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. It may be a good thing it left the water when it did, as soon afterwards the late Permamian Extinction wiped out many marine animals, including some terrifying looking armored fish. The dawn of the reptiles. When the first reptiles appeared, Earth was in the middle of a long cold snap called the late Paleozoic Ice Age. Reptiles evolved from newt-like amphibians. Unlike their ancestors, they had tough, scaly skin and laid eggs with hard shells that did not have to be left in water. Thanks to these advantages, they quickly became the dominant land animals. The reptile-like Dimetrodon reached 4.5 meters long, but despite what you may have heard, it was not a dinosaur. Pangaea. For the last time, all Earth's continents came together to form one giant supercontinent known as Pangaea. It was surrounded by a world-spanning ocean called Pangaea. It lasted until 175 million years ago when it began to tear itself apart over tens of millions of years. Its shattered remnants became the familiar modern continents. Permian Extinction. Just as the reptiles were flourishing, life on Earth faced perhaps its greatest challenge. The Permian Extinction was the worst mass extinction in the planet's history, obliterating up to 96% of marine species and similar number of land animals. We don't know for sure what caused it, but massive volcanic eruptions creating what is now the Siberian traps may have been to blame. In the aftermath, the first dinosaurs evolved. The first mammals. At the same time that the dinosaurs were spreading and diversifying, the first mammals evolved. Their ancestors were reptiles called cynodonts, whose faces looked a little like those of dogs and may have had fur or whiskers. Early mammals such as Morganocodon were small and shrew-like and probably only active at night. This may have spurred them to evolve warm-bloodedness, the ability to keep their body temperature constant. The Triassic Extinction. The dinosaurs were flourishing on land, and in the sea, giant reptiles called ichthyosaurs had become the top predators. Then another disaster struck. Our learned scientists are not sure what caused the Triassic extinction, but it killed off around 80% of species. In the aftermath, the dinosaurs became the dominant land animals and eventually reached gigantic sizes. The biggest species whose mass is accurately known, Rednodus shrani, weighed about 59 tons. The first birds. Birds evolved from feathered dinosaurs. Modern birds are essentially velociraptors with brakes instead of snouts and wings instead of arms. The most famous early bird, Archaeopteryx, lived 150 million years ago. But in recent years, slightly older fossils such as Xiantingia and Arornis have been found in China. Death of the dinosaurs. Boom! You're extinct. 65 million years ago, a huge chunk of rock from outer space smashed into what is now Mexico. The explosion was devastating, but the longer-term effects were worse. Dust was thrown into the upper atmosphere and blocked out sunlight. And in the ensuing of cold and darkness, Earth suffered its fifth and last mass extinction. The dinosaurs were the most famous casualties, but pterosaurs and giant marine reptiles were also wiped out. Living in the trees. Almost immediately after the dinosaurs were wiped out, mammals evolved the ability to nourish their young inside their wombs using placenta, just like modern humans. Soon, some of these early placental mammals evolved into the first primates. They would ultimately give rise to monkeys, apes, and humans, but the first ones were small creatures. The oldest known primate skeleton is of a species called Archicebus achilles, which weighed no more than 30 grams. They lived in the hot and humid rainforests of Asia. Supercharged plants. Plants have been busily harnessing sunlight to make sugar for hundreds of millions of years, a process called photosynthesis. But fairly recently, some plants have found a better way to do it. C4 photosynthesis is far more efficient than normal photosynthesis, allowing C4 plants to cope with harsh conditions. Today, scientists are trying to engineer rice to use C4 photosynthesis to help feed the growing population. Road to humanity. The first apes appeared in Africa around 25 million years ago. Then at some point, the group split into the ancestors of modern humans and the ancestors of modern apes. It's hard to say exactly when, but thanks to modern genetics and a host of fossil discoveries, we have a rough idea. The oldest known hominid was Sahelanthropus canadensis, which lived about 7 million years ago. The thinking ape. Our species, Homo sapiens, is ridiculously young. We have only existed for a fifth of a million years. In that time, we have expanded from our African birthplace to reach every continent and even outer space. Our activities have precipitated the sixth mass extinction and unleashed the fastest episode of climate change in Earth's history. Yet we are also the only species that has ever managed to piece together the history of Earth. So, kudos to us. And that's a wrap, guys. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you wanna see more videos, hit the subscribe button. And if you have something to say, please leave a comment in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, please do watch other videos too. And I hope you get more than what you're looking for on my channel. See you guys next Sunday with another wonderful video. Until then, I say goodbye with the hope that we would meet again next Sunday. Thank you for your time.